Continuing to track the biggest story in Canadian soccer, Thomas Müller to the Vancouver Whitecaps. Yesterday on OneSoccer Direct, we broke down the nuts and bolts, the excitement, the hoopla around the big signing, and today we're going to get more into the X's and O's with Oliver Platt and Gareth Wheeler. The question, Gareth, is a simple one. Thomas Müller is a very difficult player to assign a position to. What does he play? The answer is yes. He plays wherever he can be effective, and that's just about anywhere. Is it a 10? Is it a 9? Etc. How does Jesper Sorensen integrate him into this team? We did touch a little bit on the issues of travel and on artificial turf, etc. But to get the most out of the German superstar, where do the Whitecaps have to play him?
I think he works Müller into the team rather easily because he does bring tactical flexibility to this team. That's being noted by the way that Sorensen has played. Obviously, at this stage of his career, I think that Müller is best used as a secondary striker, but that doesn't mean that he can't come inside and play a Ryan Gauld type role for this team. And hearing Sorensen on local radio in Vancouver this week suggests that there may come a point where Gauld's season might just have to be ruled out. Like a return would potentially have to be ruled out. I think that makes a Müller coming into the team that much more important. They can play with wide players with Nelson and Sabi and Ali Ahmed when he returns from injury, but perhaps just playing a higher attacking midfield role, almost like a number 10, playing a little bit higher with the midfielders maybe dropping a little bit deeper in order to do their defensive duties. Perhaps that can suit the team, playing more of a 4-2-3-1. With Vite going, he oftentimes played in a role where there's a little bit more freedom to get forward and be creative. And perhaps Müller just plays off Brian White, and the midfielders in wide areas are required to do a little bit more work defensively. Obviously, also, he provides an alternative option to Brian White. If you just want him to lead the line, I think you're okay with that as well. I just like the flexibility that he brings. And if Gauld is lost for the season, a move like this is essential for the Whitecaps to take a step forward, because they've done really well with Gauld out of the team. But I think like bringing a Gauld or a Müller or both of them back into this team makes them that much more difficult to predict, to play against, and much more difficult to play against in general.
Yeah, he'll play number 10, I think. I think it's as simple as that. And Thomas Müller can play in different spots. He can play out wide. He could play up front, like Will said. But I think that's where you're going to primarily see him. And in an ideal world, I think you would see Thomas Müller and Ryan Gauld playing in those inside spaces behind Brian White. But the question that I think is becoming more and more of a talking point now is, are we going to see Ryan Gauld this season, as alluded to? Like, I'll give you the quote. It was on CKNW on the radio. Jesper Sorensen, I think last week, said it's difficult for me to say when and also if he's going to be available for the season, because we are close to a point where, okay, we don't want to force things if it's just for a small part of the season. I remember when this injury happened that we all kind of thought when it happened, it looked like an ACL and it looked like a bad knee injury. Then they came back and reported that it was just a sprain and it didn't seem too much. He's going to be out, assuming he doesn't play in the coming week, for 5 months. And it starts to become difficult to make a comeback from that at the crucial time of year. You know, the clock is ticking for him to be able to get up to speed and be a meaningful contributor, I think, when it comes to the playoffs. So that is a real question for the Whitecaps that I think would have added to the urgency of bringing in a player like Thomas Müller. They've also brought in Kenji Cabrera from Peru as well, who's another attacking midfield option. So they've got options there with Sabi, Nelson, Ahmed. There's depth in those positions, but I think it is just a question at this point. Are you going to be able to see Thomas Müller and Ryan Gauld, which would give the Whitecaps, just so much quality in those attacking areas? Or is maybe a bit more weight going to be on Müller's shoulders immediately to at least partially fill the boots of Ryan Gauld if he's not back this season?
And you have to question a little bit the way that this is being handled. Certainly communicated, because once upon a time, they downplayed Gauld's injury so much that he could have potentially been available for CONCACAF Champions Cup games. I mean, it seemed ridiculous at that time. A no contact injury like we witnessed, it didn't look good. And I think that all of us feared the worst. And, those fears are now seemingly becoming more realistic as the days go on. If you can somehow get Gauld back to a level where he can contribute come MLS Cup playoff time, I think that that's kind of more of a realistic goal. And what you want is come the start of August for Thomas Müller to be able to hit the ground running. It just seems like, Rios has been okay. Like there's been other okay options, but I think that they need someone else to provide reliable goals alongside Brian White. And Thomas Müller can do that, either providing them an assist or goals. I mean, he's just such a top player that, maybe it's a number 10 role, Ollie, but it might be augmented to play to his strengths, and then the team around him need to maybe play it a little bit of a different way. Nelson and Ahmed are certainly capable of playing that. Sounds like Cabrera as well, coming in from a wide area, can maybe play a little bit deeper, or then get forward with their pace and what they bring to the table. So there might be some tweaking, but overall, no real worries. And it also mitigates the Vite loss to a certain degree as well, where you play Kubas and Berhalter and Ngando and Priso and behind, and you look kind of comfortable in that area as well. So the composition might be a little bit different, but I think the style of play, it's not going to be too much of a departure from what we've already seen.
Well, the Thomas Müller effect, not enough for the odds makers to make the Whitecaps the favorites to win MLS Cup. In fact, they're still put third. Is there an addition, Ollie, that Axel Schuster can make from this point on that would boost that stock and take them over the top and give them that favorite spot heading into the playoffs?
Well, I think clearly with Müller and Cabrera in, they'll be looking at the defense, and it's just a question of how you kind of go about that, because it's a tricky position to bring in a instant starter in the middle of the season after Ranko Veselinovic and Sam Adekubi have gone down. So they've got options at those positions. It's not as if they're completely desperate for someone right now. They've got Tate Johnson at left back. Mateus Laborda has played over there and I think can do a decent job. So they've got a couple of options there. At centre back, obviously Utvik, Halbuni, serviceable players that could step up in the short term. It's just a question of whether those options are good enough to put you in MLS Cup contention when it comes to the crucial time of year. So I think they'll be looking at least one, if not both of those positions. I think they should have the resources to still make further moves with the way they adopted the 2DP model, the sale of Pedro Vite. I would think that there would be some allocation money and some roster flexibility available to them. It's just a question of what kind of player you kind of look to bring in, what's available, and who can make a really quick impact here, which is what you need in these final months of the season. Yeah,
I mean, Blackman and Veselinovic had such a good partnership. And Tristan Blackman still playing at an incredibly high level. Utvik, Halbuni, I think that both players have something to offer. But simply put, like if you lose one of those, then you're getting pretty desperate. I think that bringing in at the very least a depth center back, someone that can step in and potentially start and be an upgrade on those two players, that has to be what you're looking for, even if it's just a short-term move. I mean, this is a club that has done a really nice job projecting forward, but I think based upon their standing, a shorter-term move, one of those players, like what they call it around the baseball trade deadline, it's like a rental player, right? That's kind of what you might be looking at right now. Not taking away any of your flexibility to add to this team moving forward, but someone that can come in for the here and now and just solidify that center back position. That's it. I mean, maybe they can bring in another player in central midfield. I think they like Badwall and Ngando and Priso, some of these depth players, so there might not be a need. I always thought left back along with Tate Johnson, but Ollie said it, Laborda's been playing there. So they look pretty well covered right now with the two additions that they've made.
Joel Waltzman?
I've heard his name put out there. If it really is a rebuild in CF Montreal, I want to see what that actually means and what's that what it's all about. I mean, They advanced in the League's Cup. Maybe they try to run this out a little bit for now. I know that Waterman will be a logical one to make the connection. West Coast roots. He's a Canadian player on a team that's simply going nowhere in the league, so I understand why that's made. But let's just see what other options are out there. It doesn't even have to be one within Major League Soccer. It could be one from abroad, and I'm sure that Axel Schuster kind of knows the lay of the land. Waterman, to me, almost seems a little bit too straightforward, if you know what I mean. Like, it's one that the link is so easy that I think a lot of people will be making it, but that's not oftentimes the way that things work.
All right, tomorrow, August 1st, we expect to hear from Axel Schuster and the Whitecaps making this deal official as the Thomas Müller era is slated to begin in Vancouver.